Thank you so much, Poppy. Hello, everyone. I am Kate Baldwin. Welcome to the first day of the rest of the Trump presidency. A fresh start this morning with a fresh face as the new White House Chief of Staff, retired General and former Homeland Security Chief John Kelly, sworn in a short time ago to replace Reince Priebus, followed by a cabinet meeting that included a not-so fresh face, or a lesser fresh face, Attorney General Jeff Sessions right now. His relationship with President Trump has turned remarkably sour in a remarkably short amount of time. Moments ago, the two were in the same room and face-to-face for the first time since the president kicked off his public shaming of Sessions. So with Priebus out and Kelly in, is it all sunshine and rainbows at the moment? The president seems to think so.
Good morning. This is our first cabinet meeting with General Kelly. He will be Chief of Staff, as you know. We all know him. We respect him, admire what he's done. And at Homeland, what he has done has been nothing short of miraculous. I predict that General Kelly will go down in terms of the position of Chief of Staff, one of the great ever. And we're going to have a good time, but much more importantly, we're going to work hard. And we're going to make America great again.
Also touted a lot of the successes of the presidency so far in that cabinet meeting, talking about economic numbers. So can the new chief of staff help jumpstart the president's agenda today? Lots of ground to cover on that. Let's start with CNN's Sarah Murray, who is live at the White House. So, Sarah, despite the past week, just forget it all, the president says. I mean, the president denied any hint of a problem within his White House today.
That's right. But look, we all know that you don't oust your chief of staff and replace them with a retired four-star general if you do not want a change in direction in the way things are going in this White House. And even staffers who are working in the West Wing are hopeful that John Kelly will bring some kind of fresh start, that he might bring a little bit more order, a little bit of a quieter West Wing, one that's been plagued with staff infighting and backbiting. But they're also hoping that he can help sort of kickstart the Trump agenda. The reality is the president had a bruising defeat last week. We saw healthcare collapse, and as much as President Trump wants to blame it on the Democrats, that was at the hands of members of his own party. So everyone is kind of waiting to see if the dynamic really will change under Kelly. And of course, there's some skepticism about that because everyone knows the tone is set at the top, and many people near the White House, close to the White House in Washington, aren't convinced that President Trump is prepared to change. Kate?
Yeah, the chief of staff you can change. The president, is he prepared to change, or has he changed? We will see in probably the next 24 hours. Great to see you, Sarah. Thank you. Join me now to discuss right now CNN senior political analyst Mark Preston and Chris Whipple. He's the author of The Gatekeepers, How the White House Chiefs of Staff Define Every Presidency. Appropriate today. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Great to see you both. Try this one on for size. How is this for expectation setting? He will go down as one of the greats ever.
Ever. I mean, it's just ever. I mean, it's anybody he ever hires or he associates himself with, he always says that they will be the greatest. They will do the greatest. They will become the greatest. It's just Trumpisms at its best.
But has John Kelly taking on the post, has the West Wing fundamentally changed today?
No. Well, a couple things. One, and we were talking a little bit about this in the green room, I don't think the general is going to be able to go in and necessarily change Donald Trump, but can he go in and organizationally change everyone below Donald Trump? And in some ways, perhaps just ignore what Donald Trump does with the tweeting and what have you, and really try to enact change and try to get things done by working downward and then up to Capitol Hill.
Well, and that kind of gets to an interesting point. I mean, you have said, I've seen you say, Chris, that it's mission impossible for General Kelly if he doesn't have control over the West Wing. Why is that, and what does that look like, that
Look,
control?
I think the first thing that Kelly has to do is he has to figure out, is he working for a presidency or is he working for a TV reality show? I mean, this White House has been profoundly stupid and, quite frankly, unserious about governing for the first 6 months. It can't do anything right. A guy like Scaramucci shouldn't be within 100 miles of a functioning White House. And I think Kelly's first task is really, if he hasn't removed Scaramucci's White House credentials by Friday, I think he's failed on job one. Failing that, I think it has to be clear that Scaramucci and everybody else reports to the president through Kelly. If they don't, with the possible exception of the family and Bannon, if they don't, this cannot work.
So that means if the structure as is of yesterday remains in place, it doesn't matter who becomes chief of staff. Why is that gatekeeper role so essential? What aren't people getting?
The definition of insanity would be for John Kelly to try to take this job with the same authority that Reince Priebus had. We saw how that turned out. You know, the last time we had a general, by the way, as White House chief, it was Al Haig under Jerry Ford after Nixon resigned. That was a disaster, and the reason it was a disaster is that Ford had the same idea Trump did. He thought he could run the White House by himself. Everybody had access to the Oval. They came and went willy-nilly. It was a disaster, and he wound up begging Don Rumsfeld to come in, empowered Rumsfeld, and he almost caught Jimmy Carter in the election as a result. But if you don't do that, history is littered with the bones of presidencies that didn't understand. You have to have an empowered White House chief.
Mark, kind of getting to a little bit what Chris is talking about. Peter Baker of the New York Times had a fascinating interview with one of the I think would go down as the greats in terms of the chief of staff, James Baker, and he said that Baker said that the job boils down to either focusing on the chief part of your title or focusing on the of staff part of your title. Success kind of coming through, and he says the success really is coming through focusing on the staff. What do you think the challenges are that Kelly is up against, if that's the case?
Well, loyalties that from those that are already in position right now, including the family, mind you, Ivanka and Jared, the loyalties that they have to the president and not necessarily to the office. So Scaramucci is a perfect example of somebody who says that he is going to come in and he's going to shake things up and that everyone needs to be loyal to the president and that he's going to fire anyone that isn't. Well, the fact of the matter is those in the West Wing who hold those positions should be loyal to the president in the fact that they're trying to get his agenda passed. But first and foremost, they have to be loyal to the Constitution, and they have to be loyal to the idea of getting things done. So what we can't have, quite frankly, is this weekend to have Donald Trump come out and say, let's get back and do health care, when you have the Senate Republican leader, who is a very good tactician, saying on Thursday and Friday, okay, we didn't get health care done, it's time to move on. You can't have that mixed message.
Go ahead.
Here's a troubling thing to me is I've talked to some of the ex-White House chiefs who have not had a phone call from Kelly. The first thing any really serious White House chief should do, is to pick up the phone to Jim Baker, the gold standard, and then to call Ken Duberstein, for example, who was Reagan's successful last chief of staff. Duberstein came in in a similar circumstance in a way. Reagan was on the ropes with the Iran-Contra scandal. There was a possibility of being impeached. Howard Baker and Duberstein sat down with Reagan. They decided that if he lied to them, they were going to resign. I think Kelly needs to go into the Oval Office, sit down with Donald Trump and draw a red line and say, if you want to have your tweets, fine. But if you tell a demonstrable lie on Twitter, I'm gone. You can find a third White House chief.
One thing that was fascinating that I just saw this morning is much of what you heard the president in complimenting General Kelly on was his work over at the Department of Homeland Security, what he's done with the border, what he's done with immigration. Do you know who was working lockstep, hand in hand with General Kelly on that? Jeff Sessions over at Justice. I did a joint interview with Kelly and Sessions to talk just about immigration and the border and the efforts that they're taking on. But you've got one of them who's getting accolades and the other who is on the outs of all outs.
And that's why, I mean, the whole issue of loyalty is not to the person, it should be to the country and to the Constitution. We've seen Jeff Sessions, who showed unrestrained loyalty to Donald Trump all last year at a time when, you know, all his Republicans in Congress thought he was crazy for backing him. And then what have we seen? We saw that Donald Trump, President Trump, has turned on Jeff Sessions. We see that Rex Tillerson over at the State Department supposedly is having troubles right now with the White House. Doesn't feel like the White House has his back. So if you're General Kelly, you got to think to yourself, you know, to Chris's point, look, if you lie, if you're not with me on these things, then I'm out. It'll be interesting if he actually had that conversation.
What is the... John Kelly's not going to... Who knows how many interviews he's going to do. What is the signal, the sign, the indication you're going to get if there's a change? What are you looking for to see?
Well, you're looking for an end to Trump's unrestrained use of Twitter. You're looking for discipline. You're looking for... I mean, this White House is completely broken right now. There would be a massive repair job. First of all, it can't pass legislation. It can't issue executive orders that are enforceable. It can't prioritize the president's agenda. Nobody knows what that is. It can't get anybody on the same page. Those are all the things that in a healthy, functioning White House they all come down from the White House Chief of Staff. You can have robust debate. You can have Bannon arguing with everybody else. But at the end of the day, when the president makes a decision, everybody needs to fall in behind the White House Chief of Staff and execute it. That's how you'll know if this is working.
So that lays it out very easy. He's got an easy job ahead of him starting today.
Very
That
easy.
seems very obvious from this discussion.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, exactly. That's the name of your next book. Piece of Cake, The Life of a Chief of Staff. Great to see you, Chris. Thank you so much. Great to see you as well. President Trump daring Republicans to act on health care after last week's big failure, including his threat to cut off help to low-income Americans under Obamacare. Plus, Russia's revenge. Vladimir Putin ordering hundreds of American diplomats out after Congress votes to slap Moscow with new sanctions. Now the Kremlin says this is just the beginning. And what is it about Chris Christie and sporting events? Honestly, a new chapter when the New Jersey governor confronts a heckler basically nose to nose. See what happened.
President Trump urging Congress to get back to work on health care or he will, quote, let Obamacare implode. The president is also threatening to cut subsidies to Congress people and insurance companies that cover low-income Americans. Just moments ago, he tweeted this: if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies, and why should Congress not be paying what the public pays? Let's discuss with Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. He's a member of the Appropriations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be with you, Alice.
Let's start with that question that the president poses one more time. If Obamacare is hurting people, why shouldn't it hurt the insurance companies? And why should Congress not be paying what the public pays? What is the answer to that?
Well, first of all, Obamacare is not hurting people. In fact, what would have really hurt people was if we had passed Trump Care. And we know from the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office that that would have thrown tens of millions of Americans off of affordable care.
Right, but you know not everyone is delighted with Obamacare and that people have grave reservations about it.
Allison, nobody has said it's perfect. We've said from the very beginning we need to improve the exchanges. The first order of business is for the president to stop trying to sabotage the exchanges. There are a couple things that are totally within the power of the Trump administration. Number one, the cost-sharing payments that you just mentioned. Those have been going on for a long time. He's threatened to cut them off. That has created uncertainty, and that's why you have insurance companies threatening to increase premiums. Number two, enforce the individual mandate so you don't just have sicker, more intense care patients in the exchanges. Three, make sure you advertise the fact that the exchanges are now open and people should enroll. Congress can then get back to the regular order, as Senator McCain said, and work on a number of other things to both strengthen the exchanges in the short term, but also we should work on things like reducing the cost of prescription drugs and other things that we can do on a bipartisan basis.
The president seems to be suggesting that you in Congress, that members of Congress are sponging off the system somehow and you don't deserve subsidies or any federal dollars. What's your response to that one?
Actually, that's just flat out untrue. Members of Congress are in the exchanges like anybody else. Members of Congress are treated like every other federal employee that works for the United States government. So the president is actually just trying to stir the pot as usual on these issues. He doesn't have the facts on his side as usual. I'm hopeful that you're going to have Republicans in the Senate and the House now saying that they want to work with Democrats. Time to ignore the president's tweets. The president has also, threatened Senate Republicans and said that they should go to a different voting system. Why don't we just focus on working together to improve the exchanges in the short term and then work on these bigger issues like reducing the cost of prescription drugs? I think within the exchanges we should offer a public option in the exchanges. That would create more competition. It would drive down prices.
One more thing on this, because we just had Congressman Chris Collins on, who wanted to remind everyone that the subsidies were, that House Republicans actually sued the Obama administration over these subsidies that the president seems very focused on, and that a district judge ruled that they were illegal because Congress didn't appropriate them. You're on the Appropriations Committee. How can you justify these subsidies that your committee, that Congress didn't ever approve?
Well, the original legislation essentially directed funding for these payments, these cost-sharing payments, in order to provide stability in the exchanges. If my Republican colleagues want to join together and vote through the appropriations process to provide those payments on an annual basis, that's fine. Even better would be if Congress got together on a bipartisan basis to pass legislation that mandated the cost-sharing payments going forward. But as you indicated, the courts have asked questions about that. I should point out
decided,
that,
right? I mean, this district court decided that it was illegal.
A lower court level made a decision, but and importantly, they did not direct that the payments end. That is really important. I mean, they made a decision, but they said the payments can continue as that case was contested in the higher courts. So there's nothing to prevent the president at this point in time from continuing the cost-sharing payments. In fact, he's been doing it, but he's been doing it on a month-to-month basis instead of providing the certainty that everybody needs going into the fall. So he's been doing that. And there's no reason for him to stop doing that now, other than the fact that he might want to sabotage the system.
Senator, I want to read to you, there's another new tweet from the president that just came out. I've not read it yet, so we're going to put it here, I think, on the screen so that we can all read it together. Highest stock market ever. Best economic numbers in years. Unemployment lowest in 17 years. Wages rising. Border secure. No White House chaos. Your response?
Well, let's just start at the end. I mean, obviously, there's incredible chaos in the White House, which is why they're bringing in General Kelly. I think the struggle for General Kelly is going to be that normally a White House chief of staff has to try and organize the staff. In this case, you have a commander-in-chief who is totally out of control, tweeting at all hours of the day and night, and there's no consistency to the policy. I should point out that when it comes to the economy, you're continuing to see what you saw under the previous administration, which is continued growth. But the reality is there are lots of Americans who are still being very squeezed between rising costs and flat paychecks, which is why, Allison, the Democrats on a bicameral basis, House and Senate, have put forward a plan to focus on the economy, to focus on bread and butter issues, and come forth with concrete measures we can take to improve the economy, improve jobs, and also wages.
Well, look, I mean, I think his point is that despite whatever's going on in the White House, the stock market is having a banner month or banner run, the highest ever. Unemployment rate has dropped to the lowest in anyone's memory, recent memory at least. So, I mean, I think that the president would say his point is that things on that front seem to be working.
Well, as I say, there are millions of Americans that are really hurting. The reality is that what you're seeing under President Trump is a continuation of what was a steady decline in unemployment. You saw that beginning under the administration of Barack Obama. They had a record number of months of economic growth, and that is continuing under President Trump. The trajectory that began under President Obama, both in terms of jobs and reducing the unemployment rate. Stock market was up under President Obama as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't millions of Americans who aren't hurting. The reality is folks at the top are doing very well. Yes, if you've got a lot of money in the stock market, you're doing just great. But everybody else is being squeezed, and people are working harder than ever. The gains are going to the top 1%, folks at the very top.
Yeah.
Everybody else is seeing flat paychecks or they're falling behind, which is exactly, Allison, why we put forward a plan to begin to address those issues so we can grow the economy, but also do it with more shared prosperity.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, thanks so much for taking time to be on New Day.
Thank you.
John.
All right, a tropical storm forms in the Gulf of Mexico. Who is in the storm's path? That's next.
Out.
So President Trump's election win surprised much of the country. And tonight, there's a new CNN special hosted by Fareed Zakaria that explores why Trump won. Let's take a look.
The happiest people tend to be the people that are making a nice income, that really enjoy their life and their family life, and not the people of tremendous wealth that are constantly driven to achieve more and more success. You're expected to be a certain kind of a person, and maybe you're not necessarily cut out to be that kind of a person.
How did that Donald Trump become this Donald Trump?
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
Joining us now is Fareed Zakaria, host of CNN's Fareed Zakaria GPS. Fareed, great to see you. Answer your own question. How did that sort of what we see there looks like a more gentle, sort of romantic Donald Trump talking
He's a lover,
about
not a fighter.
how love should prevail over ambition and work become the candidate Trump we saw there?
I think what you see in that part of the documentary is the sort of reinvention of Donald Trump. You begin to realize that the person he is now is a carefully honed persona that he created through trial and error, you know, taking advantage of opportunities. And I think there are a few key moments in his life. The first is he began to realize the power of celebrity and the value of celebrity. And you know, The Apprentice for a while, not as much long as he says, was the #1 show, 28 million people watching it. I think that made him realize, my God, this is powerful stuff. That's when he really gets out of the real estate business and goes into the branding business. But then he also starts feeling the currents of America in very much an intuitive way. I don't think he had any articulated sense. And he began to feel a few things. The anger against politicians. Remember, he runs on the Reform Party. He tries to run on the Reform Party ticket for a while. And then he begins to see the toxic energy on the far right. Remember, his first political moves are birtherism.
Absolutely.
And he knew that the election of a black president had stirred a kind of ugly racial animus among some people, probably a small subset, but he knew a way to get directly to them. So all of it combined, and it was the man met his moment. You know, the point at which Donald Trump is elected is literally the low point in trust for politicians in Washington. It's a 50-year low. And that's when Donald Trump, you know, so he got his timing right, which all great performers need.
About the man right there, and we saw that Crippler lover, not a fighter moment. But then there's the moment. Talk to me about the moment, Fareed, this sort of socioeconomic hunger that existed, or to an extent still exists in the United States.
I think the part of it that I was most impressed by in doing the research for this is we know about the economics, we know about the hollowed out factories and the coal mines, and what I was struck by was the other two factors. So that's, if you will, capitalism. The other factor is culture, a real sense of cultural alienation that older, white, non-college educated Americans have, the sense that their country is changing because of immigrants, because maybe blacks are rising up to a kind of central place in society, because of gays being accorded equal rights, because of, frankly, a lot of working women. You know, everybody is sort of muscling in on a territory that, if you think about it, the white working man had. But the final one is class, social class. We don't talk about it a lot, but the election of Donald Trump is really a kind of class rebellion against people like us, you know, educated professionals who live in cities, who have, you know, cosmopolitan views about a lot of things. And I think there's a whole part of America that is sick and tired of being told what to do by this, you know, overeducated professional elite that Hillary Clinton in many ways perfectly represented. And that's why they're sticking with him.
Yes, and that's why when Democrats think, oh, how long can this go on? Surely the chaos will mean that he would never be reelected. Those factors that you're talking about that got him elected haven't changed. They still exist in the foreseeable future to 2020.
I think that if you think about one of those Trump voters, imagine what it would mean for them to say, you know what, I was wrong about Donald Trump and the New York Times was right. They're not going to do that. They're going to, you know, there's a lot of stickiness to his support.
So what shakes that then? If anything, Fareed, does it have to be a different view of what America has become to them, or a sense that President Donald Trump has failed to deliver on the things that they were expecting him to deliver on?
It's a great question. You know, the research shows that people don't vote so much on policy issues. I mean, there are studies that show at the end of an election, you ask people what party stood for what policies, and about more than a third get it wrong. They think the Democrats are for repealing the ACA and the Republicans are in favor. You know, what they vote for is, does this guy get me? Does this person know me? You know, is he the kind of person? We have David Brooks on the program saying, what they ask themselves is this party full of people who look like me, who are like the people I hung out with in high school? And that's almost like a tribal team loyalty. So I don't think that, I don't have a good answer for what will shake it. I think what could change it is if you found a Democrat. Not the Democrats are all sitting there worrying about what exact economic policy they should have and should they be more, you know, left-wing. I think the key is, can you connect?
You know, Bill Clinton had very, kind of centrist policies, but he connected. A white working class voter looked at him and said, this guy gets me. And unfortunately, they didn't feel that way about Hillary Clinton.
So while we have you, so much happening, obviously, internationally between Russia, North Korea. What do you think 6 months in, how President Trump, I mean, just today, because there seems to now be a different stance towards Russia, obviously, if he's signing the sanctions bill. North Korea, once again this weekend, just launched another ballistic missile. How do you think the Trump administration is doing with these international crises?
Well, to be fair, in some cases, they have handled, the policy response has been appropriate, measured. You know, if you think about this Russia one, if you look at the Syrian case, the problem is, I think that it is mostly because of delegation to a few good people like Jim Mattis. There is no strategy at all. The White House is essentially in chaos or paralyzed. In Russia, they've completely boxed themselves in. They can't follow any policy other than a hardline policy, because if they try to do anything cooperative, people are going to wonder why is Trump being so nice to Russia, and he has only himself to blame for that. But my point is, in many of these areas, because they did not have a strategy, because the president still does not know the details. So on North Korea, you know, the idea that gratuitously insulting China by tweeting against it is going to get you anywhere is highly, highly unlikely. So I feel like there hasn't been much damage done yet, but the process feels very chaotic, very ad hoc, very improvisational, and we're lucky in that we have not still faced. You know, one of the things about the Trump administration to remember is we have not faced a recession, we have not faced a serious international crisis. So all the chaos and dysfunction you're seeing, that's just without having really encountered any external problem.
Thank goodness. Fareed, thank you very much for all of that. Be sure to tune in tonight for Fareed's special report, Why Trump Won, 10 p.m. Eastern, only on CNN. Thanks so much for previewing it with us. We're following a lot of news this morning, so let's get right to it.
General Kelly will do a good job. He will bring some order to the West Wing.
President Trump hits the reset button.
All right, President Trump facing several foreign policy challenges, Russia's retaliations against new U.S. sanctions that are on the way, and North Korea's latest ballistic missile test. So how will the Trump administration respond? Joining us, former director of both the NSA and CIA, CNN national security analyst General Michael Hayden. General, thank you so much for being with us. You know, the situation with Russia right now, with Vladimir Putin saying he will kick out 755 people who work for U.S. interests in the embassy staff in Russia right now. How would you assess the current status of the U.S.-Russia relationship?
Well, John, it's about as dark as it's been in several decades. I actually heard someone describe the Russian view of the American administration right now as the president being Gulliver, tied down by all the Lilliputians in Washington, like me, the anti-Russian Lilliputian. So it appears as if President Putin, at least for the time being, has cut his losses in terms of a hope of a dramatic change in the Russian-American relationship. Although he didn't cut it completely, John, I think it was quite interesting that he took this step after Congress had passed the additional sanctions, but before the president signed them. So in other words, he's cutting out President Trump from this current action, a little glimmer, room to maneuver for him in the future.
So what does that mean? It means that you think he's not holding President Trump responsible?
Well, I think he's seeing that President Trump is unable to change the direction, the overall direction of American-Russian relations. And so as a matter of style, of keeping options open, the timing, doing it now, not waiting until the president has signed the sanctions, gives him a bit of an opening to play a card perhaps sometime in the future, Allison. But I think we're in this pretty dark state for a very long time.
It's pretty interesting. That's a pretty interesting a note right there that you think he's trying to give the president some space there. The vice president, right now, he's in the Baltics. And Vice President Mike Pence actually made the claim, and we'll play this for you, that it's the president's tough talk, as he's characterizing it, that caused Congress to issue these sanctions. Let's listen to the vice president.
I think the president's confirmed repeatedly that we believe Russia did meddle in U.S. elections. I think he's also said that it could have been other actors as well, but he's confirmed his belief and our intelligence that Russia was involved in meddling in U.S. elections, and it's part of what inspired the bipartisan action in the Congress to codify the sanctions that our administration has been implementing against Russia, and we'll continue to advance that.
Now, General, it may very well be that the vice president's right, that the president did inspire Congress to pass these sanctions, but I'm not sure that the inspiration is quite how he portrays it. It seems as if Congress is saying, we're taking this out of your hands.
Yeah, actually, you know you're winning in Washington, John, when you begin to say that it was your idea rather than the other guys. Although there is one important aspect here that I think we should not ignore, and that's the vice president's trip. He's going to Estonia, Georgia, and Montenegro. 3 countries, 3 friends of the United States who have all had one form of Russian intervention or another since 2007. That's actually a remarkable journey, and I think in itself a pretty strong signal to the Russians that at least the vice president's office very much objects to their behavior.
Well, look, the president went to Poland, too, before he met, with the G20. So the president, is clearly involved in sort of this geographic boxing in as well. It does seem deliberate.
General, let's talk about North Korea. It just seems to get worse and worse. The news just seems to get worse and worse. There's never any glimmer that North Korea is listening or going to change or cowed at all by the international community. Just this weekend, yet another ballistic missile test. What can the U.S. do?
Allison, not much. Our options here are limited. I think the Trump administration is now beginning to realize that there are some problems out there without real solutions. There are conditions to be managed, and their predecessors didn't have to be weak or unintelligent for this problem to continue. Look, let me lay out maybe 3 tracks that we could go down. One is accepting the North Koreans as a nuclear power. Now, that's not very good. The other is doing something kinetic that could very likely lead to very serious conflict on the Korean Peninsula. That's not good. So where are you left, Allison? You're left where the last 3 administrations have been. Diplomacy, sanctions, and perhaps bucking up the defenses of ourselves and our friends in the region. That's where we are.
General, can I ask you a question? Do you think Kim Jong-un, and to a lesser extent Vladimir Putin, and other leaders around the world are watching what's going on in the United States, sort of the chaos that has existed in the West Wing over the last week specifically, but longer in some cases, and seeing that as something they can take advantage of?
I think that might apply more to Putin than to Kim Jong-un. I think Putin sees things on a more global scale. He's actually a clever tactician, even though he might have some strategic weaknesses. For Kim Jong-un, John, I think this is an inevitable logic for the survival of the North Korean regime. So Allison teed this up by saying they don't seem to pay attention. They don't seem to respond. No, they know what they have to do. And I think this course is set. We can moderate it. We can slow it. Perhaps we can even cap it. But these guys are going to be a nuclear power.
Well, here's what President Trump tweeted about this, and I want to get your response. He says, I'm very disappointed in China. Our foolish past leaders have allowed them to make hundreds of billions of dollars a year in trade, yet they do nothing for us. With North Korea, just talk. We will no longer allow this to continue. China could easily solve this problem. Your response to some of those theories?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts immediately come to mind, Allison. Number one, there isn't enough chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago to convince President Xi to fundamentally change the Chinese approach to North Korea. That's baked into the Chinese definition of self-interest. The other part of the tweet, though, I think is even more interesting, and that's the president beginning to link the Chinese-American commercial relationship with Chinese behavior against North Korea. That's a big step, and we'll see if the president actually carries that out.
And would it be a good idea to carry that out and hurt China somehow on trade?
Well, I mean, that's the kind of decisions that the National Security Council usually tees up for the president. It's the kind of decision in which there are no easy answers. Do I gain here, but what do I give here? The Sino-American relationship is rich and complex, and careful decision-making if you want to put this in jeopardy in order to pressure the Chinese to do that.
Right.
Well, we'll have to see.
General Michael Hayden, always great to talk to you. Thanks so
Thank you.
much. So also overseas, deadly protests on the streets in Venezuela after the country's controversial election. What is happening this morning in Venezuela with the...
And Allison Camarada.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your new day. Chris is off this morning. John Berman joins me here in studio.
Big day, big week.
Great to have you here. So President Trump hitting the reset button after one of the most chaotic weeks of his presidency. In just hours, the new White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, will be sworn in. And the standoff between President Trump and his embattled Attorney General will be on display today. The president is set to meet face-to-face with Jeff Sessions at a cabinet meeting this morning.
And as far as we know, the first time they've spoken since the president started saying out loud that he wishes maybe he were gone. All this as President Trump faces several foreign policy threats. Russia's Vladimir Putin has ordered the U.S. to cut its diplomatic staff by more than half in retaliation for new sanctions. And North Korea's latest missile test has President Trump intensifying pressure on China to do more to stop that country's nuclear ambitions. We have all this covered. I want to begin with CNN's Sarah Murray live at the White House. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, John. Well, it is John Kelly's first day in a very big job. He'll be sworn in later this morning, followed by a cabinet meeting. And of course, the question on top of everyone's minds is, can Kelly actually bring order to this very wild West Wing?
Reince is a good man. John Kelly will do a fantastic job.
President Trump turning to retired four-star General John Kelly for help rebooting a stalled White House agenda and reining in a chaotic West Wing. That's after Reince Priebus became the latest in a string of high-profile Trump officials to be pushed out in the first 6 months.
I think the president wants to go a different direction, wants a little bit more discipline, a little more structure in there.
It remains unclear how Kelly's appointment will impact the chain of command at the White House, and if the former Homeland Security chief will exert any influence over the president's own behavior, including his use of Twitter.
You have to let Trump be Trump. Anybody who thinks they're going to change Donald Trump doesn't know Donald Trump.
The president remains at odds with many in his party over his repeated public attacks on Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Well, it's kind of hurtful, but the President of the United States is a strong leader.
The two men are expected to come face-to-face today at the president's cabinet meeting. Trump also turning to health care this weekend, blasting the Senate's failed efforts to dismantle Obamacare, tweeting, "Unless the Republican senators are total quitters, repeal and replace is not dead." Despite the fact that it would have had no impact on Friday's defeat, the president also urging GOP leadership to change the Senate's rules so legislation can pass with a simple majority, saying that Republicans look like fools who are just wasting their time.
You know, I said from the beginning, let Obamacare implode and then do it.
Trump also threatening to end subsidy payments to insurance companies and even eliminate some health benefits for members of Congress if the bill is not passed.
What he's saying is, look, if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, then why shouldn't it hurt insurance companies and, more importantly, perhaps for this discussion, members of Congress?
Senator Susan Collins, one of 3 Republican senators who voted against repeal, says Trump's threats wouldn't change her vote.
We need to go back to committee, to the Health Committee and the Finance Committee, identify the problems, carefully evaluate possible solutions through hearings, and then produce a series of bills to correct these problems.
Now, in addition to the domestic agenda and organizational issues, John Kelly is also going to be coming into this White House confronting a number of foreign policy challenges, including these escalating threats from North Korea, but also the U.S. relationship with Russia. We are still waiting to hear when President Trump will be signing this sanctions bill against Russia. Back to you guys.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much for all of that. Let's bring in our political panel to discuss it. We have White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, Margaret Talev, and CNN political analysts John Avlon and Alex Burns. Great to see all of you. Happy Monday. Alex, I want to start with you because you have a very comprehensive article over the weekend in the New York Times about how frustrated Republicans have grown with the disarray and chaos in the White House. Now, are these Republicans like John Kasich, who never had much faith, or are these loyalists who are starting to turn?
Well, it's pretty much everybody, Allison. And what you're hearing from Trump loyalists is not anger at the president, but you're hearing anger at pretty much everybody else, and that includes Republicans on the Hill. It includes Republicans in the White House who are close to the president, but not the president himself. And this is sort of, you could see it as a coping mechanism, but it's definitely a new phase of the way Republicans in the grassroots and at the leadership level across the country are thinking about the president.
But why aren't they mad at him?
Well, they see him as a newcomer to Washington who's received a lot of bad advice and has been mistreated by Republicans on the Hill. Whether they are right about that or not, I do think that if you sort of play out the next couple steps of this, if you listen to what the president has been saying about Congress over the weekend, you can see that we're potentially headed for a pretty big collision between the forces behind the president and the more conventional leaders on Capitol Hill who want to continue to do things their way.
And Margaret, John Kelly, General Kelly, he's the guy who's going to fix everything starting today at 9:30 when he gets sworn in before this cabinet meeting, right?
No pressure. Right, John, right. No pressure, but by noon, everything should be completely in order. You know, I mean, there are a couple of questions, and one is how much has he already negotiated, or how much will he be able to lock down with the president in terms of who reports directly to him, what ability he has to be a gatekeeper in and out of the Oval Office, both physically and kind of, in general. But also, does the president want more of a peer with whom to bounce off strategic ideas? Should I do this? Should I do that? We've heard folks like Corey Lewandowski say the president's the president. There's no changing him. But if part of this move with John Kelly is to say, I recognize that I need to do things differently, that is maybe the main thing that has the potential to be a game changer.
Look, I mean, all sort of, ridiculous rhetoric about the White House acting like a well-oiled machine in the past aside, everyone recognizes there is a problem. This is not remotely normal, not only because of historic low approval ratings, but because of a daily churn of chaos that emanates from the Oval Office. So a new chief of staff may be a corrective that's needed. The president respects generals. John Kelly's got a good rapport with the president, apparently, as well as the other members of the cabinet who are former military. I also think, crucially, he served under Secretary Gates and Secretary Panetta, two really of the wise men of Washington who have a reputation for thinking and governing beyond partisanship, and that may be what this administration needs. Now, the idea of that someone's going to change Trump, ain't going to happen, people. Look, Trump's going to be Trump, but maybe his instincts can be channeled more constructively.
Maybe. But, we don't know. Look, we don't know if the communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, we don't know if he'll report to the chief of staff or the president. Scaramucci reported to the president before, not Rice Priebus. What about Jared Kushner? Right. Does Jared Kushner report to the president? What about Steve Bannon, who was this co-equal to Reince Priebus the way it was set up before? These are sort of important questions, Alex.
Well, and in some ways on an even more fundamental level, when I was talking to Republicans in Washington over the weekend, their big question about John Kelly is, we all like the idea. I mean, Americans like the idea of someone who's not a politician, somebody who has experience from the private sector or from the military being in charge of government. This is a White House that has a broken relationship with Congress and a broken relationship with sort of just the traditional political mechanisms of Washington. Those are not mechanisms that John Kelly has spent his career operating. So if you're trying to figure out how to work with Capitol Hill, Reince Priebus was clearly not your guy to get that done. The president reached that conclusion a while ago. But is General Kelly the guy to do it? I don't know that there's anyone in or around the administration that sees him as sort of a cure-all for everything.
No. Mark, go ahead quickly.
One thing I think we need to push back upon is a framing of the problem in Washington as being outsiders versus establishment. I think it's perhaps better understood as competence versus incompetence. I think that's a more fair, less pejorative way of saying the challenges this administration is facing right now.
Margaret, let's look at the week, just to remind people, because it's hard to get your mind around what last week looked like, but we have some helpful Monopoly pieces here on the screen that will guide us through. On Monday, there were some attacks against the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and the president made a political speech, or at least portions of it, in front of the Boy Scouts.
Which the Boy Scouts later apologized for.
There you go. Next, he said that he was more presidential than every president except for Abraham Lincoln. That was on Tuesday, but I think more happened on Tuesday.
Abraham Lincoln later apologized for that.
On Wednesday, he seemed to surprise the Joint Chiefs by banning transgender soldiers from the military. On Thursday, that was the Scaramucci explosion day. That went public. And then on Friday, Obamacare, the repeal and replace, failed, and Reince Priebus resigned. I think there was actually more even that happened that week, but that's just a starter course for where we are.
There really was. Two other things happened. One is that Jared Kushner came out publicly, put a public face after operating largely behind the scenes and said he didn't collude at all with the Russians. And the other is that, of course, the president had to come forward and signal, at least with a brief statement, that he was going to support, ultimately sign that sanctions legislation. So, look, this really is a reset week for the president. Last week was a fairly catastrophic week, and I think everyone inside the West Wing recognizes this not only as an opportunity, but as, like, a mandatory opportunity to kind of take back control of the process.
I want you all to sit back and imagine the most uncomfortable Thanksgiving meal you've ever had. And then, Alex, is that what this cabinet meeting, because the president will hold a cabinet meeting today, is that what that will feel like? You have Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, face-to-face, we believe, with the President of the United States for the first time since the president started his campaign of public humiliation against him. You know, what's that going to be like when the two men are sitting face-to-face? And do you think we'll see this, cabinet fluff session, literally going around the table, saying, dear leader, this is how much we like everything that you've done for us so far?
John, I think like an uncomfortable holiday meal with family, I think people will probably say a lot of positive things that they don't mean. And I think they will probably all be on their best behavior, right? I think that anyone expecting sort of public enmity between Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions face-to-face, if that were going to happen, it might have happened already. One of the sort of ironies of this president, right, is that he's known as such a tough guy. He's known as someone who likes firing people, actually hates face-to-face confrontation with people who he is close to. So, I wouldn't be shocked to see him say really nice things about Jeff Sessions at the cabinet meeting, and then maybe turn around and say not so nice things in a different context. That's pretty much been the pattern with the president and a lot of people who are close to him.
Is this whole John Kelly move to chief of staff, is this part of a larger chess game, as has been speculated?
Appreciate it very much. Let's get some reaction. Mike Rogers, first to you. What do you think?